Okay, so you guys will have just disappeared, I think.
Yes.
I'm a danger to myself and to others. Slap me out of this, slap me around under the covers. Well, that used to be me. I used to be on the stand. Now I'm a witness. Now I can say I was bad. What can I say? That's just the way I was. What can I do except better choose who to love? I was the liar, I was the fool, I'm a lover. Hold me accountable, take me to trial, make me suffer. What can I say? Those were bad choices, I know. What can I do except to move on and to grow? You know me, I know I still crave some temptation. For the flutter, for the heat, for the bliss, for these sweet sensations. And what can I say? That's just the way I was. And what can I do except better choose who to love? What can I say? Those were bad choices, I know. And what can I do except to move on and to grow? 'Cause I am a danger to myself and to others. Stir crazy, what do you think I'm signed for? Stir crazy, you know you are the one I adore. Even if I had the chance, I'll try to leave the best in the past. Stir crazy, sometimes I just feel so changed. Stir crazy, I know it's only me I can blame. I made a promise I must keep, and just between us, don't wake up got the best of me. My mind is drifting, thoughts are at sea. And even if I had the chance, I'd try to leave the best in the past.
You guys are able to hear it?
Well, I don't think that I can go much farther, and I don't think I'll escape this swamp water, 'cause the tide has swept you away from me, and I know it's my destiny. Don't hold your breath, breathe it in, breathe it in. Don't stall your death, breathe it in, breathe it in. Well, I don't think that I can go much farther, and I think it's time to breathe in swamp water, 'cause the tide swept you away from me, and I know it's my destiny. Don't hold your breath, breathe it in, breathe it in. Don't stall your death,
Siguli swagwag, Galahindi neo gets, wagi sli wagi, nivaka deloda, onida gengwe manage. Ani bojo, danse, okinapi, how, yanko, yuko. And so, hello everyone. Galahindi is my name, means clouds passing over, and I'm a member of the people of the Standing Stone First Nations here on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Delaware, Huron, and Lenape nations on an area that we call the Dish with One Spoon Treaty Covenant Treaty Territory. And I said, Yanko, Yuko Dono, or thank you, friends, for joining us. And we are doing a bit of a special stream today because we wanted to discuss. I know that in Canada, we have Indigenous History Month during the month of June. I know that in the US, I believe it's November. Um, and we wanted to kind of discuss why we're doing this. Why do we have Indigenous History Month? And what does it mean? Because I know that on the all on the kind of the outside view of it all, it seems like it's just a celebration of culture and a lot of fun and dancing, drumming, and competitions, which it is. But I think that we need to dig a little bit deeper into the whole purpose of Indigenous History Month because it means a little bit more than that. And so we've got a couple of special guests with us, and I'm going to get them to introduce themselves. And if I could start, well, let me go. Your screen is um, cutting off Jess. Why is that? That's okay. Oh, that's backwards. There we go. That's better. Okay. So Jess, I will have you introduce yourself first, if you will.
Okay, thank you. Hello, bonjour, Tansi Tawao, Jess Nitsigason. Je m'appelle Jess. Papa masini Jack Mishkoba Nation, Gisque Gonisqueo, Nitsigason, Migiso Gitwao. Nigoto Sekutaskwinos Desmoyaswin, Otsiniakeate, The Pa, Grand Rapids, Mitsifaskiwin, Otsiniakeate, Terrace Bay, Otsiniakeate, Deshkanzibing Megwatsniwigan. My name is Jess. My spirit name is Walking to Spirit Redbird, gifted to me by Kokomani Chikabe. I'm Eagle Clan, and my family's ancestral nation is in Treaty 6, and then they moved and lived in the Métis communities of the Pas and Grand Rapids and Rat Portage and eventually Fort William. And I grew up in Terrace Bay, just near Thunder Bay. And I live here now in Deshkanzibing, or the territory colonized as London, Ontario.
Oh, okay. And Elder Cliff.
Sugoli. Excuse me. My name is Cliff. I have a spirit name, Oitrenkiamani, which was a name that was given to me in ceremony at the Sundance in probably around 1987. And it's a Lakota name. I'm from Oneida, but I adopted to the Lakota customs and ceremonies. So I became a sun dancer and a pipe carrier, and so which is how I ended up given the name that I was gifted. And what the name means, it means that my Oitrenkiamani, that's the name in Lakota, which means that my tracks appear as I walk. And I I had a name. Well, I thought I had a name back home in the Longhouse, and so I was going by that name that was given to me by my grandfather on my dad's side, and then only to discover that the name is back home. The way that we receive a name is it gets what they call kind of it goes through a process of being put through ceremony at the longhouse. And so the name that my grandfather gave me was actually put through on behalf of my cousin. And so the name that I thought I had, I didn't have because my aunt, my dad's sister, put it through Longhouse on behalf of my cousin. So that's why. So I do have a I have a spirit name, and I'm from among the Lakota people, and I do have a Longhouse name as well, Oneida, in our language, which I guess it's in dispute. I don't know how else to put it. Anyway, um, so I guess that's what I'll say for now. Uncle.
Yanko. And I want to first of all say big Yanko to both of you for taking the time to be here and sharing your time and your knowledge and life experiences. So big Yanko to both of you for that. So I think that we were going to start with an opening, which I think Cliff, you were going to do. So let me see if I can get this. Whoops. If you chat, does it change the screen? No, didn't change the screen. I thought it would change over to you. But we just
We can do that.
okay. Yeah, you go. I'm going to mute myself here, and I'll let you do the opening then, Cliff.
Okay. So I was when I say Yonko, thank you in our language, I was asked to do an opening prayer. Um, and so what I thought I would do instead is to offer a song. So the songs that we sing, especially the ceremonial songs, are in itself a prayer. And so during this song, I will invite whoever is on the circle to say your own prayer in your own way for either maybe a loved one or for your family, for yourself. And basically, the song that I want to sing is a Sundance song. And it's a song that, like I said, it's a prayer song. And so, all of the many years that I Sundance, during our ceremony, we would the drum would be singing Sundance songs, which are prayers, and this is one of the songs that was sung. And so why I selected this particular song, one of my Sundance brothers during his fast sang a song, and he sang this song. And so during his ceremony after his fast, the the spirits asked him to sing the song that he sang during the ceremony or during the fast, and he would sing one song after another, and he would always be told that that wasn't the song that they wanted him to sing, and so what he explained during his fast, he said there was a bird that would fly and land on his altar, and so during the period of time that he was singing, this bird would land on his altar, and it would go from one flag. So a flag in our ceremony is what we use. It's a material. It's fabric, black, red, yellow, and white. We also have blue and green, and there's tobacco with each flag, and so these are like offerings. And so when that bird would come and land on his flags, that's what I mean. So when I say it would land on his flag, and it would fly around and come back and land on another flag. And so that was the song that the spirits wanted him to sing in the ceremony. And so when he kept trying to recall what song they were referring to, they would correct him and say, "No, not that song." And so, so the medicine man who oversaw the ceremony actually was the spirits sang the song to him, and he sang that song to my Tahanji, my brother, and so that's how he was able to remember the song. And so I think, so that story is a story that kind of reflects the fact that when oftentimes when we are in prayer, we often wonder, is our prayers being heard? And so that was kind of like a way to demonstrate and assure us that when we do pray, that the spirits and the Creator does hear our prayers. And so even though my brother, we called him Babe, that was his nickname, and so even though Babe couldn't remember the song, um, he thought he was alone, except for that bird that kept flying and landing on his altar. And so when he finally was told what song it was, he sang that song. And after that song, what the spirits said during the ceremony, they said that we could use that song as a family song. And so I wanted to offer that song because, like I said, it's a prayer song, but it's a Sundance song, but it's also a song known as a family song. And so, out of appreciation and honor of being invited here to join this circle and talk to all of you, through our culture, we often say in our culture, we all say all my relations. After we say a prayer, we all say all my relations. And one of the things that I always like to say is that we are all related because we all have the same mother. And so that was why I wanted to choose this song to sing during this opening. So I'm just gonna sing. It's like I said, it's a Sundance song, but it's one we call the family song. All my relations. So basically, the words of that song says Wakan Tonka. It says grandfather or great spirit, um, take pity on me, and so it's kind of appealing to the Creator to pity us, especially during the Sundance. The Sundance is a very um, hard song. It's a hard ceremony. It's 4 days long, and during the Sundance, we're we're praying throughout the day from sun up until sundown. When we have breaks during the day, I think they have 4 breaks. But we can be sometimes dancing for like 4 hours at a time, 5 hours at a time, because it's a long, you know yourself, it's a long day. And so during that time of the ceremony, we, while we are dancing, we're also fasting. We're sacrificing ourselves. We're going without food. We're going without water. And when I sundance, the years that I sundance, it was in South Dakota, which is in the United States, and it tends to be a very hot climate, very it's dry, and but it's where the Badlands are, and so it's a very challenging in terms of just the environment itself, and then the fact that when we dance, we fast for the 4 days. So the fasting is without food and without water. And at some point during the ceremony, um, the Sundance chief will cut into our chest and put a peg. And so, we're tied to the Sundance tree, and we dance and pray. Um, and so we are instructed to dance until we break the flesh. And so when we dance, part of our sacrifice is including the fasting, but it's also offering our flesh and blood for the sake of our prayers. And so part of the preparation in doing the Sundance is to make flags that I talked about, which is it's about a meter of fabric, black, red, yellow, and white. And so each of those um, fabrics, it represents not only the 4 races of mankind, but also the 4 directions. And so beginning in the West, which is so, and then we have also, we make blue for the heavens and green for Mother Earth. So those are the flags those are the offerings that we make. So that's just to give you some idea of that ceremony that I was describing, the Sundance. And so, anyway, with that, I'll, again, thank you for the invitation to join you and to offer a prayer. Don't go.
Yonko, for the opening, Cliff, and still part of what we were talking about is Indigenous History Month, and I know that for the most part, indigenous is a blanket term, so that it actually includes three distinct groups of people that are the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. There is the Inuit people who actually inhabit the Arctic, subarctic, Russia, uh, part of Greenland, and our northern part of Canada, and the Alaska part. So uh, they are a specific group of people with their own traditions and culture and history. And then we have the First Nations people, which also is like the Lakota, the Oneida, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and then we also have the Métis. And Métis is kind of like the newer group of the three, because they are a combination, or Métis means mixed. So they're a mixed uh, group of people that are part European and part indigenous, and they've, I think, for the most part, originated in Red River and area of Manitoba, if I remember correctly, and a lot of them came from the employees of the Hudson Bay Company when they were back doing the trades with the indigenous peoples, and then they created a community who built their own culture and their own teachings and traditions between them. And uh, so indigenous is encompassing all three groups, and all three groups are part of the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. So just want to clarify, when we're saying indigenous people, we are referring to three uh, distinct groupings of people. And the other thing that we also obviously have to be aware of is the history of colonialism. And for those of you who are not sure, colonialism is what we call the practice of one nation extending its power by establishing settlements and political or economic control over a foreign territory and its indigenous people. So that refers to the settlers who came from Britain and came here and took control of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, and essentially that resulted in what we now call the Indian Act and other ways of controlling. And it was I think partly a result of not being able to create the genocide and the extermination of the indigenous peoples like they originally tried to attempt. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit. So when we're looking at today's discussion, we're talking about the importance of Indigenous History Month. This is part of our history. So we want to talk about we celebrate our culture for obvious reasons because we are reclaiming it. We're reclaiming our languages. We're reclaiming our traditions and our teachings. And our youth or our younger generation are grabbing and gravitating to it. And with a hunger that I believe is a very positive thing to see. And we really love to do that. So when we start this conversation, I guess what did, Jess and Cliff, what do you think is part of the takeaway that people who are coming into our powwows or our celebrations for Indigenous History Month, what should they really be taking away from it?
What do you think?
I know it's a pretty open question. That's
Hmm. Yeah, it is a very complex. The history is a very kind of a complex history. And just the other day, I was invited to, it was an inclusion gathering. In fact, I think it was for the city of St. Thomas. And so it was a committee of the police services in St. Thomas. And so they have an inclusion council of all of the different ethnic um, people that come from different parts of the world to settle in St. Thomas in that sense. And so, one of the things that I had an opportunity to inform them about was we have this long history is Haudenosaunee. So Haudenosaunee is another term that you will hear that we talk about. And in our language, Haudenosaunee, that means people of the Longhorns. And so in Canada, um, is was described. There are three legal uh, members of what we refer to when we talk about Indigenous. So when we talk about First Nations in particular, there are like 634 reserves in Canada, and these reserves consist of, in our case, Haudenosaunee, or we're also known as Iroquois, but we also have Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. There's Algonquin, there's Cree, there's all kinds of many different First Nation groups. And so when I was at the Inclusion Council presentation, I was talking about how in 1613, um, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Grand Council of our people, they had long-term relationships with, because when people came to North America, they were met by our ancestors, and they were welcomed to this land. They were taught how to survive, and so back in the 1600s, and even before that, so supposedly uh, Christopher Columbus discovered um, America in 1492. So when we had, so in 1614 we had formal kind of relationships, what we now refer to as treaties. In our case, it was called the two-roll wampum. So the first treaty was made between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Dutch government. Today, Dutch is, the Dutch government is now known as the Netherlands. And so, our first formal relationships were kind of cultivated between our Grand Council and the Dutch people at that time. And so when we made a wampum or a treaty, we call it the two-roll wampum. So the two-roll wampum is a kind of a depiction of a treaty, and so it kind of signifies, there's a belt, if you could imagine a belt separated by three rows. On top is there's a white roll of wampum, and the next row is a row of purple wampum, and then there's another row of white wampum, another row of purple wampum, and then a third row of white wampum. So the two purple wampum and the two-row wampum represents the both of our. There's a picture of the two-row right there. So the two purple wampum side by side is an illustration of our canoe is Haudenosaunee. So as we're going down to the river of life, this is to signify that relationship. And we would go down the river of life between our people and the settler people. And the idea is, and it would be kind of divided by principles of sharing, respect, but the idea was, as we're traveling together, um, we're kind of assuring each other that we won't interfere. We're going to go down life together. We're going to go down the river of life together, and we're going to respect. It's going to be based on values. It's going to be based on principles. And so this first treaty made by our people with the Dutch people was made in 1613. And so obviously Canada itself didn't even exist until 1867. I mean, and as the United States just celebrated their 250th anniversary of their independence. And so even America didn't even exist when our governments made agreements and treaties with some of the settler people that came to our land and our territory. And so the idea of the two-roll wampum was to formalize the relationship between our people and our customs and our chiefs and government with the settler people. And so in 2013, on the occasion of the 400th anniversary of the Turo Wampum, there was a there was a contingent of our Grand Council who went to the Netherlands to observe the renewal of the Turo Wampum. So that was kind of like a way to um, remind each other, that we have this long history and we have this. But the intention was that we were going to base it on traveling together on the river of life, respecting each other and honoring each other. And the idea was that we wouldn't interfere with each other. We would kind of go down the river of life together. And and so even to this day, 400 years plus later, we still maintain this the principles of the agreements that we made together, and so ever since the the person who occupies the White House came into power, he started what he calls, make America great again. And so, my point was, um, we need to make North America great again because we had a foundation of a relationship that was founded on mutual respect. It was founded on mutual, cooperation and all of the values and the ideals that we need to be able to live harmoniously together. And so I forgot the question. Might be my that might be my 5 minute question.
Yeah, I think I forgot the question. What the takeaway? What because we have a lot of people who come to powwows, and I remember when I was younger, we used to have uh, on the on the border, we used to have a yearly powwow that would alternate from being on the Canadian side and then the next year it'd be on the American side, and then they would put it back on the Canadian side. And part of it was a celebration of the fact that we have the Jay Treaty, which allows us to cross the border back and forth as because we do not recognize this imaginary border that the colonial governments have created. And so part of what I remember though is always people being able to buy these China made tomahawks, which were like the little wooden wooden tomahawks with colored feathers on it. And I think the intent may have been more capitalist minded at the time because how can we profit from this group in whatever way we can, and unfortunately I think some of our own people have kind of fallen into that mentality and that mindset, and it's taking a lot of time for us to kind of reclaim and bring that back to a more roots based idealism. So you did mention 630 odd federally, I say federally recognized nations across Canada. We also got to make note that there are a number of nations that are not federally recognized for various reasons because there's a criteria, if you will, that nations have to fit into in order to be recognized by the government, and that goes for both Canada and the U.S. And so there are indigenous communities across Turtle Island that exist but are not recognized, just because they don't fit what the governments feel their check mark should be. So just so chat, you understand that there are 630 odd nations that are recognized, but there are more than that actually on Turtle Island. Um, the other thing was the term. Yeah, the Haudenosaunee people have been called Iroquois people for a very long time, and Iroquois was a French word. which was actually a mispronunciation of a Huron di- uh, word meaning snakes, because they used to call the Haudenosaunee people um, snakes because we were very counted in sneaking up to people and into our enemies, and we're skilled at that, and more so than many of the other nations. So they didn't like that, and so they would call us this snakes in their language, and then the French kind of took that term and is kind of labeled us with it, and it became used so much and so often, like many things, it almost gets grandfathered in. To It's just like Indians. I mean, we're not Indians, but people still call us Indians, and I think we're slowly starting to see that kind of diminish as well. And we're seeing more and more people start to use the word Haudenosaunee versus Iroquois now, just as a way of as we're transitioning back into reclaiming our identities. So just making a note of that. And that two-row wampum being maintained by Indigenous peoples, we do recognize and we do acknowledge and maintain our side of that agreement. I'm not sure how much the colonial governments are keeping to their agreements, because they have obviously affected our people in numerous ways. And so that agreement is still in place, and we still acknowledge and recognize it. It's time for us to kind of remind the mainstream and in the colonial governments of that agreement, and try to hold them to that, and get back to that initial agreement that we had put in place for so long. And so what's affecting us in that sense is the attempt, right from the first Prime Minister of Canada, a system of assimilating Indigenous peoples into the mainstream culture. And so the way that they try to attempt to do this is through residential schools. And so these were built to take our children away from their communities and remove their language, remove their hair, and remove their traditional clothing, and force them into conformity. And in the process of that, we have lost basically thousands of children um, through this system, either through experimentations that they've done through food experiments, where they are trying to determine how little food can these Indigenous children survive on before they die. There was uh, experiments with drugs, medications, not drugs, but medications. They experimented with our children on, and some of our children ran away. And in the process of running away, we get stories like the Downey Wenjack Foundation had started, and Cheney Wenjack, who ran away at I believe he was like 14, and died. He froze to death alongside of railroad tracks. And that was a story that Gord Downey from Tragically Hip really brought to the forefront, and tried to, with through his allyship, tried to really make an awareness. And that's why he created the foundation. And so we need more people like um, Gord Downey to be on board with really pushing their allyship with us, so that we can get our voices amplified and get them into areas of our systems that we can't ourselves get our voices into. So that's the thing. So as one of the other things we need to start doing is decolonizing. And I think, Jess, you're the expert here for decolonization. What kind of strategies do you recommend to people?
Well, I think they build on the conversation that we've already been having, right? About how to be in good relationship, rooted in the two row wampum and additional wampum. What do those good relations look like? And really, in order to decolonize, and we need to decolonize ourselves internally, right? What are those colonial beliefs and practices that we hold and that we do? that are harmful, that are not true, that play on stereotypes, and how do we learn about that? And so part of that being in good relationship is we ask and we listen, right? Whether we're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, whether we're on our own territories or not on our own territories. So I'm Nihiameti, I'm not from the territory that I live on. And so it's really important for me too to learn about, to learn from Galahindi, to learn from Elder Cliff, to learn from folks on these territories and from these territories. What are the cultural protocols? What is the history? What are the realities people are living in? And to really listen to the answers, not to be like, oh no, that's not what I heard. Like I heard this, right? So I must be right. But to really ask and to listen, and then to think about what does it look like to be actively in solidarity every day, right? Because part of decolonizing is refusing that colonial violence and colonial harm and colonial system, and to accompany in the ways that are appropriate Indigenous people who are of and from the territories that we're living on, and to make that change, right? From those relations of domination, right? Those colonial relations of domination to relations of equality and justice that are rooted in Indigenous ways of knowing and being, in that truth and wisdom, in those original instructions that are about living with our Earth Mother and our more than human relations in a good way, that living with one another with respect and reciprocity. And so for me, decolonization is living in that way, but we need to learn about what it looks like on the territories that we're on. We need to refuse colonial lies, or what Leanne Mosak Simpson calls white lies. And it's all rooted in being in good relations so that we understand what we need to be doing and so that we can do it.
Right. So listening is the key, I think, and this is, I think, also what I say in my stream is that in order to create a more harmonious future, the first thing we must do is learn about the people that we are afraid of or don't understand. So whether that be the indigenous people, the LGBTQI people, two spirits, the Palestinians, etc. There's an intersectionality amongst all the kind of the marginalized groups that have to be addressed in kind of a similar way as far as how to amplify their voices and acknowledge that they exist. And one of the other things I think when we talk about the indigenous peoples and why we're angry people, and then ultimately we have all kinds of reasons to be angry. But what we should be doing with that anger is channeling it in positive actions to try to bring people together, because it's easy to be angry, it's easy to blame, and it's easy to to do the that route. But it's harder. It's kind of like that. You put that ball on the side of a hill. Does that ball roll down or does it go up? If it rolls down the hill, things are descending, which means that our children, our next 7 generations that we're being taught are going to be our future, are going to get a terrible world given to them. But if we push that ball uphill, it's going to be a slower process, it's going to take longer, and it's going to be harder. But ultimately, we get to put the flag at the top. And that's what we're looking for. If we want to find a way, how do we reach the top of that hill so we can plant our flag in a way of successful futures for our children and our next 7 generations? And when we're talking about relationships with the mainstream, I think one of the things is Indigenous people don't feel like we're being seen. When we go to the TV shows, at least at one point, we hardly ever saw ourselves on TV. And when we did see Indigenous people, it was always non-Indigenous people playing Indigenous people. Um, so the media and the really played into that whole thing of not existing. And I heard Buffy St. Marie talk one time about she went to someone and they asked her what her nationality was, and she said, "I'm Indigenous." And they said, "No, you're not. Indigenous people don't exist anymore." That's what the mainstream think, is that Indigenous people aren't around, and we are. We're still here. We always have been, and we always will be. We're the caretakers of this land. So one of the but our spirit in some cases have been broken. And so we find there are indigenous people whose spirits have been broken to the point that they resort to alcoholism, they resort to drugs, and so we become there's a great number that become addicts. So when you walk down our streets, sometimes you see people sleeping in the doorways because they have no homes. There's so we're not seen. And part of what I tell the non-indigenous people to do when the first step and the easiest thing to do without ever costing you a thing or taking anything out of your time is when you pass an indigenous person, make eye contact and smile. It doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't take any time out of your day, but it makes a big impression on the person who's passing you. And when I walk down the street and I see someone look at me and they nod and smile, that makes my day. And that makes me feel like I'm seen. And I think that's one of the first steps and easiest steps for non-indigenous people to do to kind of build on that beginning of reconciling our relations. So you brought up something about someone brought up something about the police. Um, and one of the other things that's happening, I think, that we tend not to see talked about a lot is police violence towards Indigenous people. And like Chantal Moore, for example, was an Indigenous woman who moved out to New Brunswick, and her boyfriend called the police and said, can you have do a health wellness check on my girlfriend because I believe she may be stalked. And so the police out there went to her home, and apparently Chantal had a knife in her hand because she was being stalked and because she was afraid. So she kept a knife close by, and the police shot her like 7 times. And then when the family went to pick up her remains, her leg was broken. Where did that come from? So this police violence that's happening and it seems to be increasing over the last few years. I mean, last year we had like I think it was 15 people in a 2 month span. 15 indigenous people that were killed during police interactions. Um, I think that has to be brought to the forefront of the news as well, just so that people are aware of why we are fearful in some cases and very reluctant to interact in some cases as well. Um, is there anything that you guys think um, we could do to improve on the way that the interactions with police and indigenous people could be put out there?
Well, in 2018, I created an organization called the Indigenous Justice Network, and the reason why I did that is to help facilitate, the kind of advocacy that needs to happen to try to. So when I was talking about the thing that I went to on Sunday was with the Inclusion Council of the St. Thomas Police Service, and so there are these. I think there's an acknowledgement that there is a kind of a really um, there's a big challenge between improving relations between our people and certainly with the police. Um, One of the things that I maybe comment on is the fact that one of there was there's an organization that exists right now. It's called the Correctional Investigator. So it's kind of like it's a way of overseeing on the part of the government the 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 relationship, I guess, that the prisons have with, especially with Indigenous people. And so in 2021, which was only 5 years ago, the correctional investigator reported that for the first time that Indigenous women are 50% of federally sentenced women. And, so they always make the point of saying that we're about, in Canada, when you reference Indigenous people, we're about 5% of the national population. So, there's a population of about close to 40 million in Canada. And between the three groups that you mentioned, the Métis, the Inuit, as well as the First Nations, collectively known as and referred to as Indigenous people, um, we account for about 5% of the population in Canada. So for 5% of the population in Canada, and yet in federal prisons, the fact that Indigenous women are 50% of the federal prisoners, there's a problem. Obviously, the fact that we are so badly overrepresented in prisons, and so in terms of the 5% share of the population that gets accounted to or ascribed to to Indigenous. For First Nations are probably maybe 3% of that 5%. So when you take into consideration the numbers of Inuit people, when you take into consideration the numbers of Métis people, collectively, maybe out of the 5%, First Nations might represent, well, we'll say 3%. So if and then of that 3% share of the population, maybe half are women, and so that would make it 1.5% of the population of First Nation. I mean, of Indigenous people in Canada are should be women. So, but the fact that women are now 50% of federally sentenced women in Canada, it makes it clear that there's a very um, poor, to put it mildly, experience that our women have, especially in the criminal justice system. So the idea of the Indigenous Justice Network was a way of trying to create the way that we deal with groups like the police. So, for example, I used to be the executive director of the Aboriginal Legal Services of Toronto, and at that time, um, I was a part of a. They had a committee called the. It was a part of the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, CACP. But they had a committee. It was called Policing with Aboriginal Peoples Committee, and so I was on this. I was on this national committee, and there were we had representatives from the Assembly First Nations on the committee. We had representatives from the Native Women's Association of Canada on the committee, the Inuit Taparaset Kanatami, which is the Inuit organization. And then we also had the Métis National Council that was on this committee. And there were five national organizations: the Inuit, Métis, First Nation, the Congress of Aboriginal People. So CAP, the Congress of Aboriginal People, is for off reserve Native people. And so of this committee on the CACP, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, this Aboriginal people or peace policing with Aboriginal Peoples Committee um, was was an acknowledgement by the government that there needs to be some kind of a like I said, a bridge between the prisons, the policing, and Indigenous people in Canada. And so, there's a lot of work. So obviously in 2021, if 50% of federally sentenced women are Indigenous women, there has to be a lot of work that still needs to be done, between policing, between the police and the Indigenous community. And so, we're making all of those strides to bridge those divisions. And it's going to take a lot of work, but it's going to take efforts by the work that Dr. Jess is doing at the university, the work that you're doing by having these kinds of circles. And, it's going to take a collective effort. And so I want to, thank the people who are on this Zoom or on this meeting who are not Indigenous, who are trying to reach out to his allies, and is a way of trying to find a way to build the bridges that need to exist so that there is going to be harmony among our people with some of the settler people who have come here. So earlier you were talking about you're talking about residential schools, and so just before we came to this session, I was just talking about the fact that in 1828, the Anglican Church of Canada started building what we know is it's called, which was one of the first residential schools in Canada. It was being built. They started building it in 1828. By the time it was finished and they started taking students, it was 1831. Canada didn't become a country until 1867. And so it's always been my contention that, under whose authority, if residential schools were being built in Canada before Canada was even a country, under whose authority was it? So when you look at the history, when you talk about the Anglican Church of Canada, it's also known as the Church of England. So when Stephen Harper, as a prime minister, apologized to Native people because of the residential school system, and I think it was in 2009. I've been really kind of advocating for the fact that the apology needs to be extended to, obviously, to the British Crown, to the back then, before Canada became a country in 1867, or before we got the Canada Constitution Act of 1982. Until throughout that time, we were governed by what they called the BNA Act, the British North America Act. So the British North America Act, which was the constitution that was governing Canada until Canada formally became a country, it suggests that Britain, right now known as the United Kingdom, they need to be a part of the equation of apologies that we expect. Because when Canada apologized for residential schools, that was kind of in a way of trying to mitigate the impact of residential schools in Canada. So there was a class action suit that was started against Canada because of the residential schools. And so, they made what they call the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. I think it amounted to about a little over $5 million. And so, but the settlement agreement was a way of the churches who were responsible for. So in Canada, I think there was officially, there was about 147 residential schools that were built. And so if the first residential school that was built was known as the Mohawk Institute. Was built in 1828, before Canada itself was a country. Then, the period of time. So Canada took over the residential school policy officially in 1883. So from 1828 until 1883, I think that there was a period of 55 years that Britain would have to assume responsibility for the residential schools, and churches for the residential schools were built. So there was a and then when Pope Francis came to Canada in 2022, or maybe it was 2022, because on May 27th in 2021, there were 215 unmarked graves that were discovered at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So for that reason, on April 1st in 2022, Pope Francis invited First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people to the Vatican so that the Catholic Church could offer an official apology. And so, and then when after that happened, he was invited back to Canada to apologize to our people in our own traditional territories. And so he came back to Canada for what he called his penitential pilgrimage, and it was to kind of atone on behalf of the Catholic Church for residential schools. And so he was here for a week in 2022 doing his pilgrimage, penitential pilgrimage. On the plane, as he was about to leave back to Vatican City, one of the journalists on the plane who went to the press conference asked the Pope, why during the time that you apologized, why did you not use the word genocide? And so when the question was put to him on the plane before he went back to the Vatican, he said, frankly, nobody asked about genocide. And so he said, if you're asking, was the experience of Indian children genocide? He admitted it. He said, yes, what Indian children went through in the residential schools was in fact genocide. And so that was Pope Francis who made that admission before he departed back to the Vatican. So the following year, on May 31st in 2023, the Catholic Church renounced and repudiated the doctrine of discovery. And so the doctrine of discovery is what I referred to back then. I referred to it as the linchpin of colonization. And because that's what many governments around the world use as their excuse for taking our land and taking our resources. They said that they had this doctrine of discovery was the thing that they used as an excuse to say that if they went to a land that was not civilized and not occupied by people who were Christian civilized people, then they could, by this doctrine of discovery, they could claim the land and resources for church and state. And so that's what they did. So when the Pope admitted that the intention of the doctrine of discovery was not for genocide, it was not for the nefarious purposes of what the governments used, like Spain and some of the other countries that dispossessed Indigenous people from their land and from resources. So he said that was not the intention of the doctrine of discovery. And so, my concern now after this renouncement of the doctrine of discovery, it's indigenous people. We're the ones that have to say what it means. The fact that the doctrine of discovery was renounced or repudiated, we have to be the ones to say what it means. It can't just be up to the church to say, okay, we renounce it. You know, we want to rub our hands clean of it. There's more to it than that. And so that's I guess my next quest is to call for a summit of indigenous people to define and decide what it means that the Catholic Church has renounced the doctrine of discovery, because it was our lands that were taken as a consequence of that doctrine. And so now that the Catholic Church itself renounced it, we have to decide what it's going to mean. And what we expect is a reparation, or to repair the disharmony that was caused from so there's a war going on right now. The Israel has occupied the Palestinian homeland, their territory, and so they've been opposing, doing all of these illegal occupations, bringing war within the people of Palestine in Israel, and so there's a lot of talk in the world right now about genocide. We've lived through genocide, and so I think that's where we need to be able to come together, because a lot of Indigenous people in Canada really support and ally ourselves with the people of Palestine because of what they're going through. But there's been a lot of talk, like Benjamin Netanyahu is considered to be a criminal. He's a criminal, according to the World Criminal Court, because of genocide. And so this is not some kind of a trivial thing that needs to be accepted and accepted. Period. We have to fight back, and so that's a lot of what I have been. That's kind of been, at least through the Indigenous Justice Network, one of the things that we're doing is we're on this quest to hold Canada and churches and the RCMP accountable for genocide. So in the year in 2022, a year after the discovery of the 215 unmarked graves at Kamloops, the Indigenous Justice Network had the first World Conference Against Genocide. And so this year, I'm planning on having another World Conference Against Genocide. But I mean, we need allies to be able to manifest that, to make that work. So all of the efforts by things that you're doing with this podcast or with this group needs to be able to support the efforts of what we're trying to do, which is and the only way we can do that, nobody's going to listen to Cliff Summers just because I say, we need to do something. It's going to take a kind of a collective action. Just in the same way, the people of Palestine need to support people around the world wherever they can reach out and expect to get some support. That's what this time calls for. And again, I lost track of the question.
Right. I know it's so easy to kind of snowball our ideas as we go along, like this. So the doctrine of discovery, the way it was explained to me, I heard this. If it was Sinclair, and I, for the life of me, can't. Murray Sinclair said, you know. So here's the thing that it equates to: if you are a neighbor and you're looking at your next door neighbor and your car is sitting in the driveway, no one's in the car. You can walk over, jump in the car and take it and drive away and use it as you wish. The neighbor can say, "Why did you do that?" And all you have to say is you weren't using it. So what happens with the settlers coming over, they're seeing lands that they feel aren't being used. They decide, well, we have, according to the doctrine of discovery, the right to take that land and use it because it's not being used, which is not really true. Because as we think about it, all of our medicines, all of our food, and resources that we use to become sustainable come from that land. So we are ultimately using that land for medicines and things like that. So it's, because we're not physically planted, our communities in a specific area does not mean that the land's not being used. So that argument that they give, I think, is kind of rubbish. Um,
I mean, not only that, they made it more um, insidious or insidious because they said if it's not occupied by Christian people, then
right,
it's kind of open to whoever wants to claim it. And so they would. So that's why a lot of our elders and people talk about when the white man came, they came with a sword and a Bible, and so you either had to submit or be struck down. So that's kind of been the unfortunate history between settler people and our people. And so here we are as indigenous people trying to find a way to reach out and find a way to create allies. And so we have historically, in our case as Haudenosaunee people, we have the Turo Wampum. We have all of these things on through our culture and through our efforts and through our historical relevance to apply our best intentions with trying to trying to build relations with them. And so so we created, so our elders or our chiefs back then, they said, well, if we have a two-roll wampum, and we'll define it and depict it in such a way and present it in such a way that we're going to be governed by peace, by respect, and there's all of these ideal principles that we hoped would guide the relationship between the settler people and our people. And so, but those were not always honored or respected. Like you asked earlier, um, what there hasn't been a treaty that's been respected or honored by the white people or the settler people who made them. There's not been one treaty that has been honored. So there was kind of like a collective joke. The white man made one promise. They promised to take our land, and they took it. And so yeah, so we've been trying to counter that prevailing attitude and behavior ever since. So even when the head of the Catholic Church comes to Canada and says, yes, it was genocide. So, after I had the World Conference Against Genocide, I was invited to participate on a global convention and they said to me, because the growing narrative in Canada is to deny genocide. And so we see what's going on in the States. They're changing their historical references to the truth about the genocide in the United States. So MAGA, or what used to be known as MAGA, or the GOP, the Republican Party, is, and so they're it's a very political process. I mean, to the point where even the head of the Catholic Church had to say, it was the doctrine of discovery. The intention of it was not to facilitate genocide. The intention was different, and that's why they renounced it.
So you mentioned the 215 um, unmarked burials that were found in Kamloops.
Yes.
That seemed to have opened the floodgates for uh, discoveries. Well, I wouldn't. I don't even know that I call them discoveries. It's more like exposing of unmarked burials across the country. And so, with all of this coming out in the open, and people are being made aware of what's happened historically. What do you think of the schools, the buildings? Should the buildings remain or should they be torn down? Because there seems to be a bit of a back and forth as far as how people feel about that.
Um, I guess nobody can really make a determination about what should happen. Like in terms of the Mohawk Institute, that was, like I said, it's the oldest residential school in Canada. But the people in Six Nations have spent a lot of time and money to restore the building so that now it's a museum. And so I think that's what, one of the other things that Murray Sinclair, when Murray Sinclair was alive, he was the co-chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so, one of the things that he was saying is that, so they did about a 5 year. Their commission was about 5 or 6 years long to determine um, the impact of residential schools. And so when after they finished their commission, they had a document called the 94 Calls to Action about what needs to be done. So out of those 90, so we just had last year was the 10th year anniversary of the outcome of the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So in 10 years since the commission, of the 94 calls to action, I think maybe they've started to work on maybe 15 of the calls. So there's a lot of work. And so, one of the things that I was saying to the prime minister, because I do communicate with the prime minister's office. So for example, on July 1st in 2024, the Supreme Court of the United States in a decision about the United States against Donald T. Trump, or Donald J. Trump, I guess. They granted him immunity. they granted him immunity that was. But so at the time, I sent a letter to the Prime Minister's office and to the Governor General, to the Privy Council office, and said, that Canada should become the champion of the, um, because Canada, and especially the states, they talk about being that they are champions of the rule of law. And so, on when SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, granted Trump immunity in 2024 on July 1st, I was saying to, and Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister at the time. I said, that Canada should become the champions with our people on the rule of law, to support the rule of law, because, and I was saying that, it was kind of like a natural opportunity and invitation to Canada to become formally, a champion with our people on as a champion of the rule of law, because July 1st is Canada's birthday. So, I was saying that SCOTUS, who made a decision on July 1st, there's no better indication that Canada should be, because the Prime Minister and the government has always claimed to be a champion of the rule of law. And so I said, well, this is a perfect opportunity to, in other words, put up or shut up. So they didn't accept my invitation. So, but I mean, again, like I said, who am I? But somebody had to ask, so I did.
Yeah, so there's an organization called Indigenous Watchdog um, that are tracking the 94 calls of action. So as of June 2026, 17% of the actions have never been even started, let alone worked on. They have 43% that are in progress. 26% got started, but then have been stalled. And now they've got a completion of 15% out of 94. So 15%, that's probably like 12, maybe 13 calls that have actually been completed. So and that's like over 10 years now. That because they got that in 2015, it's now 2020. That's 11 years ago. They got the calls to action, and they've gotten 15% of it done in 11 years. That's seems like a pretty poor scoring of their acknowledging how important Indigenous people are to Canada. And that's kind of makes you wonder if we're that significant and that important that they want to build and reconcile relations. You would think that they would move a little bit quicker than this on the actions to try to build on that reconciliation. So, as far as you mentioned that people are talking about genocide, you know who the people are talking about genocide is the activists and the lefts. As far as actual governments, they acknowledge that there's an issue, but there are no government officials that I'm aware of that actually are open to using the word genocide. They seem to be really reluctant because it seems like that would be an acknowledgement that they're historically, systemically trying to eradicate a group of people, and they
Well,
just
one
don't
of
want to face that.
one of the 94 calls to action was for a I think I forget what they called it, but about to acknowledge genocide. It was to for Canada. So I mean that was one of my other points to the Prime Minister was the fact that even though the Pope himself has acknowledged that there was genocide by the church against our children, um, Canada still hasn't renounced. Uh, I mean, they apologized for the residential schools, but they haven't acknowledged genocide. They did in a national inquiry about missing Indigenous women and girls. They admitted it there. Trudeau did in 2019. But other than that, there has been no formal pronouncement. There's been an apology for the residential schools, but there's been no admission about the fact that genocide did occur and that it was a policy of the. I mean, so that's the idea. That's the thing. Residential schools, because it was a statute that was adopted by Canada in 1883. So the official policy, it was a state-sponsored genocide that was
Right.
accepted by the Canadian government in 1883.
There's also going to, I know part of what you're hoping is that folks who are listening will have additional resources and be able to learn more. So if they Google MMIWG final report, there's a supplementary report that explains the legal finding of genocide. So if folks are interested to read a little bit more, to learn a little bit more about what exactly that means and why there was that legal finding, that's possible.
Yeah, actually, I have a command that brings them to the MMIWG site, where it leads to the progress report. So I think there was 231 calls to action, um, and I think that they've even been worse on that. So I think there's something as of 2023. I haven't looked at it since then, but at that point they'd only done two of the 231 calls to action for the missing and murdered Indigenous people, which is kind of really negligible, in my opinion. Um, so the other thing we're looking at, I often question is the stereotypes that we still have. People still think that Indigenous people are drinkers. People are still thinking, thanks to people like Justin Bieber, going out and saying Indigenous people get everything for free, all this free stuff. That really, really kind of irks me a little bit because anything that we get is not free. We've already paid a high price for what we're getting. And part of what it is treaty agreements. This isn't something that we've been given for free. These are treaty rights that have been given to us because there's been agreements on us sharing land or sharing resources, which of course went way beyond sharing. But but that whole idea of people saying Indigenous people get this for free and they get education for free, they get all their medical stuff for free, and it's not free. Um, so, what are the stereotypes that really bother you guys?
Well, I mean, that certainly does. And like to your point, we do have treaty relationships. And so some of the treaty rights are, healthcare, education, lands reserved for Indians, tax exemption. So, um, maybe to put it another way, a treaty is a nation to nation. It's a kind of so for Ontario, as big as Ontario is, it's the biggest province in Canada, the most populated. It's probably one of the richest provinces in the country. Yet it cannot have a treaty with Canada. It can only have so Ontario is kind of subservient, or it exists because of the Constitution. So there's a provision within the Constitution that kind of depicts the or portrays the relationship between Canada and the province of Canada. Whereas, so that's why they accord us the reference or the term First Nations, because we and different prime ministers have talked about the fact that we have a nation to nation relationship. So maybe to make a point about the fact that out of 231 recommendations during the final report of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls National Inquiry, the fact that only two of the 231 recommendations has been acted on. So that kind of reflects political will. So the government has to want to or wants to be seen to be doing something. That's one thing. To be seen to be doing something is one thing, but to actually be doing something is another thing. So that kind of when you evaluate or judge the political will of a government to basically honor the relationship, that's an issue. So that's why on when the Supreme Court of the United States granted Trump immunity, that's why he said to the Prime Minister of Canada, because Canada is always saying that it respects the rule of law. I said, well, why don't you join Indigenous people to be the champions of the rule of law? Because the intention that Trump made, why he wanted immunity, he was saying if he was to retake the House, in other words, if he was to become the president again, his intention was to dismantle the United States Constitution. And so my concern about that, and so since he's become the president and became the president again, he has been on a very kind of a committed journey of trying to dismantle the United States Constitution. So they keep talking about they keep talking about the fact that the Constitution, like everything is a constitutional crisis. And but yeah, so he's kind of on track when he started to impose the tariffs on Canada first of all, and then all of the rest of the countries around the world. All of that was intended to impose, the U.S. will on the rest of the world for illegal tariffs, and all of so we've been on this dangerous course of history and this dangerous course of the formal dismantling of the United States Constitution. And so when I was talking about the fact that we had a wampum as a government against or with the Dutch government dating back to 1614, that predates that predates the 250th anniversary of the independence of the United States. So we've been operating as a government, passing laws and making agreements that we call treaties and that we call wampum with different settler governments. And so we need to renew our sovereign. We can't just become what we are now, which is I think you made the point several times about the fact that we have the official recognition of 634 reserves in Canada. So that's official recognition by the federal government. But there are many other independent reserve communities that are not federally recognized. And so, we need to become renew our sovereign relationship with our original governments and our original institutions, like in our case, through the Confederacy. And so I think we're starting to do that, but we need to up the ante a little bit and get on board with that and
Now,
start.
to be fair, there are some indigenous communities that do not want to be recognized federally because they see it as giving in to the colonial system and not wanting to be part of that, which I can kind of understand, but they are kind of on that flip side, they're leaving themselves out of the ability to create treaties. If ever there are going to be any new treaties made, because if you're not recognized, who are they making a treaty with? So I don't know that's in my opinion. I don't know that that's the best strategy. I just understand. To me, it seems more like pride, kind of getting in a way of progress because ultimately the settlers aren't going back. They're here, and so we have to find a way of kind of cohabitating on Turtle Island with them. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Um, what we now call democracy on Turtle Island was really based on the Haudenosaunee laws, and especially the U.S. setup. And because we had the originally 5 nations, which eventually became 6 nations, each of our nations had their own laws and traditions. But as a group, collectively, we also got together to make agreements with each other, um, that kind of govern how we interact with each other as nation to nation as well. So that idealism became what I can't remember which leader in the U.S. it was, but who created the democracy in the U.S. So that's really based on our laws, but I don't know that they're working it quite working it quite the same way as the way that we did, or as efficiently as the way we did.
I mean, that's exactly what my point about the fact that Trump is on his
Yeah,
determination to dismantle the United States Constitution. And my point about that is that was based on the model for that was the Great Law, and so yeah, so if they dismantle the United States Constitution, what's it going to do to the? So not only is the um, rule of law, or what they refer to, in peril, but so is the whole history and the whole dynamics of the relationship that certainly our the you know the our great I mean our Grand Council has with all of these different governments around the world. So we have the Geswenta, the Turo wampum with the Dutch, but we have the same agreement. We have a two-row wampum agreement with other countries around the world as well. So if so, we really need to be concerned about the fact that if there is if there is no if Trump is successful to dismantle the um, United States Constitution, then it's gonna have impact on our agreements as well. And so we need to be proactive and concerned about that.
which kind of reminds me of Danielle Smith. Um, and Alberta's separation
Yeah,
attempt. Like,
exactly.
you know, I mean, with the treaties that are in place, the treaties pre-exist the existence of Alberta as a province. So, and our treaties are with uh, the monarchy, not with the province. So ultimately, the province really, in theory anyway, should not be able to ever separate without first talking to the Indigenous people. And so that seems to be a big misstep in Danielle Smith's strategy. Uh, Again, my opinion.
Agreed.
So, appropriation. What do we think of appropriation? We see, um, for example, probably one of the worst ideas was Scheer back in the 70s, who wrote Half Breed and then pranced around scantily clad on the back of a horse wearing a long headdress. Um, as being one of the first things that always come to my mind when I think of cultural appropriation. But we also have all these sports teams mascots that are kind of actually not necessarily appropriating, but kind of mocking the culture in a sense with mascots. Uh, what are your thoughts on the appropriation?
Well, and I think that relates to one of the stereotypes that for me is so damaging and harmful, which is that Indigenous people are not fully human, right? And if Indigenous people are not fully human and don't have the full rights that other human beings have, then it's possible to do so much violence and so much harm, right? Which is where the genocide happens, but also where stereotypes and caricatures of Indigenous people can be used by sports teams or companies, with separating Indigenous people from traditions, from humanity, from their nations or tribes, because that all becomes possible when we're dehumanized. So I think that's the root of appropriation, is saying, well, you're not fully human and you don't really have rights, so I can do whatever I want with your image. If you're not the real living Indigenous people of today, then I can appropriate as I want and there's no consequences or no problem. And so I think for me, appropriation is incredibly harmful because it's part of that broader spectrum of dehumanization and violence that's done against Indigenous people all the time.
So the other thing with the headdress for me seems like it's a sign of disrespect because headdresses traditionally are earned. They're not something that you just buy at the dollar store and run around with. And you know, so for me that was a bit of an issue. Um, Probably one of the reasons that I do, I don't have any of Here's music in my my song list. Just I really have an issue with the way that she handled that, and in letting people believe for the longest time that she had any kind of indigenous ancestry was was also kind of not very cool. Um, and But she didn't correct the narrative there because from my understanding, it wasn't necessarily Cher who decided that she was going to go down that road, but she did, and she was okay with it because it was a marketing tool. It was a gimmick that allowed her to benefit financially, with a reputation, with a successful music career, etc. And so that's just an issue for me. But speaking of that, we kind of go into pretendians. Um, you know, how serious do we find the issue of pretendians?
Well,
And
I think that's related to the question of appropriation, right? If people are appropriating whole identities, that causes so much harm. I have a colleague at another university who talks about the damage that's done to students if faculty members are found not to be Indigenous, and the students are carrying these teachings that they thought were from an Indigenous faculty member or an Indigenous elder, and then they don't know, right? Then they're in crisis. Do I have teachings? Do I not have teachings? What's real? What's not? What do I say about it? So harming at that sort of individual level, and then also harm for people who are Indigenous and people who are reconnecting. So we have Métis students at the university where I teach who are afraid to say publicly that they're Métis because there's also now this weaponization of identity that's happening that's rooted in um, what's happened around folks who have pretended or appropriated identities, and then suspicion and fear. So I think it perpetuates harm on so many levels.
Right. We have Thomas King, uh, probably one of the latest ones that was brought out, um, who apparently years and years have been questioned about his indigenous ancestry. Um, and it only recently came out, like in the last year or two, I think, um, that he has absolutely no ancestry. But he successfully had awards given to him and accolades regarding his book writing. So there's this idea that you're benefiting from saying you're something that you're not, which Thomas King did. But then we have someone like, say, Buffy St. Marie, um, who believed she was indigenous, and I'm not here to say she is or not, because I don't know that it's been truthfully and fully explored. I know that there's a documentary that I felt was a bit one-sided that came out, by W5 in relation to Buffy, claiming that they had proof through some sort of birth certificate, etc. And some family members who she had bad relations with to begin with, who are, who are now coming out and talking against her. So so there's so many things there, but from day one, she when she came out and was telling people she was indigenous, was in a time that it wasn't popular to be indigenous. So at that time, I don't know that she was saying it as a benefit, for her career, because of that. I mean, even Robbie Robertson in his time said, I never said said I was indigenous because oftentimes my parents would say, be proud that you're indigenous, but just be careful who you tell, because it wasn't a marketable benefit for you to do that, especially in the music career. But Buffy did it nonetheless. She had albums go missing, truckloads of albums go missing during her time. She was put on an FBI watch list. Um, so there was a lot that and she still continued to advocate for indigenous rights and make indigenous issues aware. She had a nation here in Canada that adopted her, went through ceremony. She had to go through the teachings, just like anyone else, and was adopted and accepted. And even after the documentary, that family still accepts her. And so, from my understanding, we as Indigenous people decide who belongs to our communities, who we claim and who we acknowledge. And so, if her community accepts and acknowledges her, then who is anyone else to say that she is not a member of our community? So there's kind of two sides to that story, and I think for me, part of it seems to be um, community, because we are the ones who decide who are our members, and if we accept somebody, who else has the right to take that away from them?
Yeah, I agree that, I mean, that's a good point. Like in terms of Buffy herself, um, so I mentioned, even though I'm from Oneida, I have extended family in Pine Ridge. So they have a process called hunka, which is a traditional adoption. And so even though I'm from Oneida, I'm kind of accepted in among the Lakota people through that ceremony. I'm not Lakota, but they do accept me, and so I am. So I think of my family is I think of them as my family, and so I mean, to your point, it's a very valid question, and like regarding Buffy, so just very recently, I know that the University of Toronto took away a doctorate degree that they had
Yeah.
granted her based on her ethnicity or the fact that it's held in question. So my point is that or my because I thought about it many times, especially from a traditional point of view, the fact that we have ceremonies where we adopt people and you're right, nobody can question. So back home there are people who don't necessarily know their clan, and so if they want a clan, it's usually our clan, the Wolf clan, that kind of adopts them, and until they can find where they belong, and until then they're part of our clan system. They're part of the Wolf clan, and so yeah. So it's a very valid point. So regarding the so regarding Buffy, again, getting back to her experience and what happened with her. When I seen that the University of Toronto took away her degree, um, I guess I kind of felt that I thought that was really kind of low on their part to do that. Because when I think so, even if it's true that she isn't necessarily indigenous in the sense that she has um, a biological connection to any of our nations.
The
On the
blood quantum.
Yeah, on the other hand, we have probably hundreds, if not thousands, and hundreds of thousands of our own people who are in fact biologically members of this group or that group who deny it. They would much rather never claim being so-called Indian or First Nations just because of shame, and nobody calls them out. Nobody says you're really an Indian, you're really Cree, or you're really this or that or the other thing. Because but nobody calls, nobody challenges them and says, you're denying your true identity. And so I don't know. So I guess regarding, again, getting back to Buffy, she has achieved so much that has benefited our people, and so at the end of the day, that's kind of what I appreciate and respect and acknowledge. So now within the music industry, we have a whole section reserved for Indigenous people, for First Nations. We have all of these different categories, under the Canadian music industry that recognizes that has not only recognized but have a place for us, so that we can be so that was something that came about from recognizing Buffy and her gift, and so that can be taken. We can That can be. I mean, I guess it can be taken away from her or from our people, but all of our people who are benefiting from her legacy, um, it can't be diminished. So if we do have artists who get a Juno because of the category that Buffy helped to create or champion, then it wouldn't be right if the Juno company or industry tried to take away somebody's Juno because out of the fact that they took away um, or I question Buffy for who helped to create the category. So there's so many kind of different dimensions to it that but so I always kind of get back to the point where we have so many of our people who are status and who are biologically connected to one tribal group or another who are in not only are they in denial that but they would just as much not come out of the woodwork and say and acknowledge who they are, even though it can be biologically and legally connected to, but we say nothing about those people. And yet there's people who are like Buffy. I mean, there was a long argument about even somebody like Shania Twain. So I thought, well, I remember that it was not cool to be even considered. I mean, like I ran away from school when I was taught that the Iroquois people are savages. And because I didn't accept that, I hated school. And I would run away from school. In fact, I don't have a high school um, diploma because I had such a objection to to the lies that the education system was trying to um, present about our people. So so even to this day, I don't, and I challenge I mean, they teach anymore that our people are savages and heathens and all of the things that they portrayed us in school through history that I objected to. So yeah, I mean, so there's a lot about that. But now after 46 years, I just celebrated 46 years of sobriety in search of my quest to my identity and to the fact that, or to the point that I have accepted, the custom of the Lakota people. And because we come from a Haudenosaunee community or a matrilineal society, you know, before she passed away, I asked my mother for her blessing because I wanted to learn the customs of the Lakota people. So she gave me her blessing because I said, I know we have our own customs, we have our own ceremonies, we have our own longhouse. I said, but I want to learn the customs of the Lakota people. And so because we come from a matrilineal society, I asked her for her blessing, which she gave me. And so yeah, so there's really kind of a lot to be said um, about somebody like Buffy. I mean, there's just so much about identity that is in question, not because of not be, like I said, I've spent 40 the last 46 years on my journey to the customs of the Lakota people, and I became a sun dancer. I became a pipe carrier, and a lot of the songs that I sing are Lakota songs, and so, but I celebrate it. I'm comfortable with it. I've accepted it, and I have my mother's blessing for what I have decided for my own life. And so, so we can't really define or say to anybody, you're right or you're wrong. It depends on what your intention is. And so, getting back to Buffy, in her case, her intention was good. And so, because of it, because of what she set out to do, and because, being a strong and proud advocate as an Indigenous woman, at least in terms of how she's seen herself and what she accepted for herself, and being proud of the fact that she was adopted by the family and Pegasus who adopted her. She so that's I respect that. I respect that they have adopted her, that they accept her as their daughter, as their sister, as their relative, and and I think she's comfortable with it. But but
Yeah.
but the fact that so much of what she has accomplished and achieved, um, we still benefit. We benefit. Our people, our artists benefit from. So I know other people from our communities who have Junos because of the category that was created by Buffy Sainte Marie, and they earn it, they own it, and they have the proof and the Juno to prove that they're entitled to it. So I
Well,
think
she actually has had her Junos taken away, unfortunately. But yeah, Buffy St. Marie and Elaine Bomberry were instrumental in expanding the categories because at one point all we had was Indigenous Artists of the Year, and what happened is they piled all the Indigenous artists into one little category, and it was depending on what genre was popular that particular year would be likely the artist who's going to get that award. They've at least now kind of done two things. They've broken out that category up into indigenous traditional and indigenous contemporary, which gives us a couple of Juno categories now. But the other thing they're also now doing is accepting indigenous artists into other categories. So, like Crystal Shawanda, for example, was the first indigenous artist to win a blues album of the year, and which was awesome to see. So good on Crystal. Um, as far as no one calling out the indigenous people afraid to acknowledge their ancestry, I think my growing up, when I grew up, I remember wishing, I wasn't indigenous. I wish, I'd looked at the settler families around me and my schoolmates when I went to my schoolmates' homes, and they had, that typical two parents, two kids, and a dog kind of family, and were really happy, and that's kind of what I wanted. And they were accepted in the community, and I wanted that. And I think that that's a story with a lot of our people is that we really kind of wished we weren't indigenous for many years. And it took a lot of reflection and a lot of life experience to come around to terms with the fact that, well, I am indigenous. That I'm not going to change. So I have to accept it. And then it came to the point where now I've accepted it. Now I have to be proud of it. Why not be proud of who I am our cultures, because we have such a diverse culture in Canada. I mean, we have my traditions, but we have the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe traditions, we have the Chippewa traditions, we have, Cree, the Haida. Everyone has such a different culture in of their own, and we are all indigenous. So we share the fact that we are part of the original peoples here. Yet we also celebrate the fact that we all have beautiful cultures that we can share with one another, and I think that that's a beautiful thing. So why would someone not acknowledge that? Um, is I think probably a bit of a fear, like you mentioned, of being called out for as a pretendian because you are not native enough, or you don't look native, or whatever the reasoning be. But the people who are not calling them out and saying, "Hey, come and be part of us because you are the people who may have a colonial mindset, and their reflection is on the fact that we have certain amount of resources that are provided to us through our treaties, And if we have more Indigenous people, then that means the less resources are available for each of us. Really, and so when we go to our dentist and we try to get dental work, there's a certain amount of uh, benefits that are available for each nation on an annual basis. And if we have more Indigenous people in our group, then that means there's less of those resources for them to provide us. So that might be just a mindset thing as far as not calling out people who are afraid to identify themselves. It's just a thought. I don't know if it's true, but from my perspective, when I think of what logically would make sense as to why we would not call people who are Indigenous out and say, be proud of it and shout from the rooftop. You know, you have a beautiful ancestry with a beautiful history. So why not shout it out? So, any questions from the chat by chance? And any last thoughts from either of you as far as what you think you'd like the community to be aware of? I know that traditionally with the Indigenous what we call what we used to call Solidarity Day, um, we have the opening ceremony, which all the Indigenous veterans lead into with our flags. So now I'm thinking about this. This is another thing that kind of bugged me a little bit. I mean, it's a minor thing, but it's there. Um, I saw a video clip that was posted on Facebook of an NDP politician who was at the front of the parade with all the veterans, um, leading the way into the circle. So this is a person who was calling themselves an ally, and ultimately, I suppose they have good intention. They're there. At least that's the one step. What I wondered though, when I think of allies, is allies are those who are trying to amplify our voices. They are the ones who are trying to acknowledge that they want to build a relationship with us. But for a politician to be at the forefront of a parade seems to be more of a photo op that allows them to put the note out there or put the media out there to say, look, I'm with the Indigenous peoples. And I think for me that what I would have preferred to see is the veterans first, the elders, the women and children, and then the allies. Because the allies should be supporting, but not taking away the sunshine from our vets, um, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
I agree that allyship is about listening and standing behind or supporting or following, not being in front.
Called respect.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree, but it should be, it should be. There's a protocol. There is a protocol, and it's usually the the Eagle staff goes first. So in a powwow, in the powwow in a procession, there's always the Eagle staff is first. So the Eagle staff represents our nation, but there's also they also have a Canadian flag. They also have an American flag. So what that represents is the veterans, like you said. But so there's a lot of our people who went to war for Canada or for the United States, and many of whom made the ultimate sacrifice. And so, one of the things that I learned um, growing up was that we had to actually appeal to the government for the right to continue our dances, our celebrations, the powwow, and so part the way that they did that is we had a contingent, a medicine man that went to Washington, and because he wanted to make an appeal to have our be able to practice our dances, our ceremonies, our celebration. And so when he went to so he went to the Congress. They had a room at the Congress that they had set up. And so this medicine man was sitting in a circle, and he had a stick that he painted red, and then he passed that stick around the room. And as that stick went from person to person, he told them to blow on it. And so occasionally, one of the members of Congress, would blow on it, and you would be able to hear the sound of an eagle whistle. And so that whistle was the thing that allowed the Congress to agree. So they gave that medicine man, they gave him it was, I think it was a sheep skin, and it was a license. So it was a license for him to be able to practice medicine. And so back then, so this was in the 1800s, and so, or maybe in the early 1900s. But after that, that's when they allowed us to be able to have our culture back and to practice our ceremony. So that's why, so that's what some of the old people, some of the elders said that when they earned the right to be able to celebrate our culture again and practice our dances, the other thing that they promised was that to do that, or as a recognition and appreciation for us to be able to celebrate our culture, we would carry their flags in the grand entry. And so partly that's why they have a Canadian flag and an American flag, but it's always led by the eagle staff, which is first. But the other flags was some. So when you have a powwow, our drum was often invited to be the host drum, and so part of the protocol is that we would sing the grand entry song, and then we would often have to sing a flag song. And so during the flag song, depending on where we were, so there's an American flag song, but there's also a Canadian flag song. And so when they sing the American flag song, they sing in the words, they say grandfather. And so when they say the term grandfather, we know it to mean the creator, or we know it to mean God. And so when we say grandfather, that's in our mind, that's what our intention is. But in the actual song, when they say grandfather, they also recognize the so-called, the great white father, and so, or the president. And so that's how we kind of appeal to the government. So when we were given the ability to practice our culture, and in Canada, when they sing the flag song, they say grandmother. And so what the elders said was that in America, we have the president, but in Canada we have the queen. So that's why there's the distinction between the American flag song, which says grandfather in the words of the song, or in a case of the Canadian flag song, the word grandmother is in the words of the song. But at the end of the day, we get to celebrate and practice our culture and our celebrations. But that was what I understood about. So yeah, there is a protocol, and so so within that protocol, there's always, like I said, there's always the flags. So there's there's the eagle staff, which is our flag, and then there's a Canadian flag, and there's an American flag. But but represent, like I said, the fact that some of our warriors paid the ultimate sacrifice. So, we do acknowledge the fact that we have our elders who are, or our warriors and veterans who did serve in Canada. And sorry, I was just getting a call.
Yeah, just try. I now it made me think. I was thinking. I had a question there, but oh, some of the vets that came back here in Canada. For example, my mother's cousin actually lost his status, having gone over and fought in World War. Was it World War II or Korean War? I can't. Maybe it was the Korean War. Anyway, he went over. He fought for Canada, and came back finding out that they had taken away his status because he was off reserve for an extended period of time that went beyond that time quota that were allowed to be off reserve and keep status, which seemed kind of ridiculous at the time. But it took him a couple of years to fight to get his status reinstated. Um, so some of our vets paid in one way or another, even if they didn't, you know, pay the ultimate price overseas, they still paid when they came back by not being accepted. And not, you get benefits if you live in the city, and if you live on the reserve, you get nothing. And if you live on the reserve, you're not status. So then they say you can't live on a reserve anymore because you're not part of the group anymore. It's this whole systemic issue that's always been around. We've had issues with every system that we can imagine as far as trying to maintain our identity. So, and speaking of the identity, there was someone in chat here, Clifford, who has asked me now, after hearing you talk about Buffy, are pretendians becoming more accepted then? I don't see Buffy as a pretendian, but I mean, I'll let you answer that question.
Are they becoming more accepted?
Yeah,
Um, just on its face, it's kind of a difficult question to answer because I was making the point that it's, like in Buffy's case, she was adopted. There was a family in Pagos, yeah, in Saskatchewan that adopted her, and so when they adopted her, so I think, like I said, well, I think you even admitted that the family still to this day honors the fact, and they still consider her a part of their family because they adopted her, and so I don't know. I guess maybe somebody could call somebody who was adopted, and they could call them a pretendian, but who's to say? You know, so
right.
so that would have to be the person. They can look. I mean, I've made these elaborate campaigns to discredit somebody, and I mean that's what happened to Buffy. That's what happened to Thomas King. There's been so many people that somebody has invested a lot of time and effort to investigate and research and, I mean, disrupt lives. But like I said, in Buffy's case, we have a whole industry that has benefited from her, like all over. What she had this campaign that she called, the what's it called, the
She had the cradle board thing
cradle
that
board,
she,
yeah, cradle board project. And so, I don't want to, so to speak, throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is kind of what would happen. So if they dismissed everything that she did, because she's a so-called pretendian, then I think that kind of defeats the whole purpose of, and it undermines the respect that should be accorded. Uh, the family who adopted her, they recognize her as their family. They didn't stop and disrupt their entire ceremony and belief just because CBC or W5 or whoever it was did this investigation and found that there was kind of disharmony within the family, and so and so said she's whatever. There's I can't answer that.
Right. Yeah. There are some pretty significant groups that have stood by Buffy. I know that the '60s Scoop Healing Foundation, they posted a whole page of a statement on why they still stand by Buffy St. Marie, and part of it is, first of all, acknowledging that we don't recognize the colonial record keeping, because especially during the '60s scoop, that record keeping was very shabby, and there was so much modifications and changes to eradicate the indigenous peoples from their culture, right? That just was easy for them to come up with a birth certificate that said Buffy was born somewhere to so and so, without it really being authentic if it were true, right? So that is always going to be a question for them. So part of what they broke down in their position was, um, the support of '60s scoop constituents or survivors. So we stand in solidarity with people who stand with solidarity with the '60s scoop people, the healing and reconciliation. So their perspective on the principles of healing and reconciliation. So bringing this to the media and saying, Buffy's not indigenous, etc. Does that help our people? Does it help us with our healing and our future mental health, as far, or is it tearing and dividing us? Right? Inclusivity. We don't exclude or condemn individuals who support Indigenous survivors. Indigenous traditional laws and practices. So we uphold Indigenous traditional laws and practices, including custom adoption, which she went through, and then indigenous teachings and philosophy. So our lens is primarily indigenous teaching and philosophy rather than Western European record keeping systems, which allowed the practice of '60s scoop to exist and thrive in the first place. So those were kind of like the key points of what they put on their website as to why they stand with Buffy St. Marie and still accept her. So their conclusion, they said, was that they unanimously stand with Buffy St. Marie as an ally and an advocate for '60 Scoop survivor constituents, whether or not she herself is an actual '60 Scoop survivor. So that wasn't a key part of why they would accept somebody. It was all an overview of all the steps that they went through, and there's a whole page on what they put out there as a statement. So yeah, the Cradle Board project was what you were talking about. So from how they describe it, it's an interactive multimedia curriculum designed by Buffy St. Marie in the '90s, and it's to bridge the gap between Native and non-Native students, to teach Indigenous history, science, and core subjects, but based on true history versus the history, his story that was created by the colonial system. Um, and then the other foundation was called the Niawan Foundation. She also founded in 1968. And that organization was set up to provide scholarships for Indigenous students pursuing higher education. So specifically supporting tribal college founders and leaders. So what they call philanthropic endeavor that she has put in here to benefit all Indigenous peoples. So she is definitely uh, given back to the community, and that's I think another key part of the difference between Buffy Sainte-Marie and say Thomas King, for example. You know, she is really uh, embedded herself in the culture and in the teachings and has shared that and as well as the struggles that we face. So I can say I have no issue with accepting Buffy as one of our people, regardless of who wants to kind of step on her toes. I mean, and who's going? Why at this time in her 80s would this come out? It's not like they haven't had the last 80 odd years to bring this up, um, and they bring this up just as she's retiring. I think the timing is a little off for me too. And anyway, I want to say thanks to the Serfs for the raid, bringing your community over. Thank you so much. So we have about looks like 67 people here listening. Um, so any last thoughts that you guys would want to give to them?
For me, I think just for folks to remember that those good relations are always going to be the foundation. So Indigenous History Month, Indigenous Solidarity Day, always with Indigenous community, relationships, conversations, listening, and action.
And I would add to that that it should be more than a month. We should be discussing this year round. Um, Whenever you're, particularly if you're around an indigenous community, um, look out for events that they host or put on. You know, especially community events that involve a ceremony. Um, there are so many progressive communities now that welcome settlers into to be part of our circle because we want to educate and bring awareness regarding the issues, but we also want to show them again how beautiful our culture is and what they can accept and learn from it and use essentially in their own way as far as things like teachings of the medicines to gather and things like that, which we've had a couple people on the channel before who have talked about medicines and that are right in our backyards, basically, like dandelions. That instead of poisoning them and putting chemicals on them, we should be picking them and using them in our salads, in our jellies, or in our wines, or whatever it happens to be. Yeah, dandelions are useful in so many different ways. Um, so that's something we can learn from the community. So if you're around an indigenous community, definitely reach out and see what they're doing and see what they're hosting and see if you can learn from them. And even if you can, the other thing is learning a word. And I usually say learn the greeting, learn to say hello to people. We don't technically have a word for hello or goodbye. Uh, we say Sagoli, or glad our paths have crossed, or we say Nonkiwa, or till our paths cross again. So there is no permanency in our greetings and salutes, salutations, because we expect at some point we're going to cross paths with you again. Might not be in this world, might be the next one, but at some point we're going to cross paths again. Um, Cliff, did you want to maybe do one last song to end our stream?
Okay, sure. Just trying to think of which song to sing.
Traveling song?
Um, there's a story to this song that I was going to sing, um, and it happens to be a song. Um, it was a song that one of my late brothers came to me in a dream, and I didn't see him because he was behind me, but I could hear him, and I knew who it was because of his voice. But he we were going to have a Sundance that year, and part of the exercise, I mean, one of the, I don't know, maybe a protocol that we have at the Sundance is we have, it's a memorial. Part of it is a memorial. And so we've been talking about that a little bit in our conversation. But so the reason why he came to me in the dream, he said during the Sundance he wanted to have a song sung for him as a memorial. And so why that came to me now is kind of in honor of this circle that we're having. Um, we partly, we talked about Buffy, for example, and I think that's kind of what he meant. What his concern was, he didn't want to be forgotten, and so he wanted us to remember him, and he wanted the song to be sung in his honor, so that we would remember. And that's really, I think, what we all want to achieve in life is to be able to make a difference, to be able to leave a legacy, to leave something behind so that people um, will remember us, but even maybe just as importantly, um, remember that we were here. And so that's the song I want to sing. So he came to me, like I said, in my dream, and so he wanted me to sing a song for him. And so I sang a song, and I said, "You want me to sing that song?" It was funny because he said no, not that song. And then so I sang the song that I'm going to sing now, and he said, "Yeah." He said, "Sing that song." And the other thing that was funny about that song was I was singing it, and I was singing it so loud that I actually woke myself up. So so I woke up singing that song. And anyway, so I'm gonna sing that song. Oh, outcast, all my relations. Thank you.
Again, Vigyamko, for taking some time and being with us. I really appreciate your spending and your sharing. It's part of I think when I grew up, the stories were um, the theory was to sit around the elders and just listen to them, because that's how we learned. Is we just listen to the elders when they talk and tell stories, because even in the casual conversations that they have, there's usually always a little nugget of a teaching somewhere in there that you can learn from. And so when you can come right out and just put the stories out there for people to hear, it is so appreciated. And so I want to again say big yanko, Des and Cliff, for joining us today. And I hope we can do this again. I think this is it's informative, and it's a way to allow other people to learn from us in a more laid back, casual environment, rather than being kind of stuck in something so static, that they lose attention and they don't, they don't listen. This is at least is a way for people to feel good about, sitting back and just listening and learning. And that's so appreciated. And we need more of this. Okay. And and I say nonki wa until we meet again.
Okay, I'll go.
See how I do this now. Okay. Sigoli people. Sully, Swagwag, I see a hype train got started there. Fantastic Kitty. Oh my goodness. Um, and Scissorman. Holy, you're breaking your piggy bank. Thank you. Thank you so much. Um, and I battery. Um, who else? I can't see now. Um, and I don't know I can get my, okay, let me just do this. I'm gonna have to and see this list because I'm using a different program. I don't have the stream credits popping up at the end like I would normally through my Streamlabs. But so go back. So we had uh, and I'm not sure how to say this. Feiji Hetki rated in, Argonian Bum rated in, Yanko, and the Surf TV rated in. Thank you, all the raiders. And then we had the beginning of the stream. Fantastic Kitty resubbed, has been subbed now 61 months. Wow. Tigwig resub now for 36 months. And Bobby Lasers, go for tier three, you sub. Wow. Thank you. And uh, Park Horse Language rated in. iBattery gifted to Nordic Spirit Wolf, and Fantastic Kitty gifted to Scissorman, and then Habitual Strummer rated in. Wow, I missed the raids. Sorry. Scissorman gifted 10 community subs, and then Swifty Goth um, gigantified an emotes, and Fantastic Kitty gifted to another sub to Swifty Goth, and Scissorman gifted another 10 subs. Um, Scuba Duck cheered 1,000 bits. iBattery cheered another 500 bits, and then Fantastic Kitty gifted 5 community subs. So lots of support today, and lots of raids. Um, for such a short stream, I got a lot of raids. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to now again, because I used a different program today. The way that this stream will get saved, it got recorded and it'll get saved to my computer, or I'll post it onto YouTube after the stream, and so it becomes available for anyone who wants to listen back to it. And hopefully catch anything that they may have missed. And anyone who missed part of the stream can definitely check it out. So what we'll do then is we'll look for a raid target, and many of you may know. So tomorrow, here's the thing: um, we are now officially part of the Creepy Crew. If you don't know, Gramers is a streamer, a partner on Twitch, who created a team called the Creepy Crew, primarily DJs and primarily people who are streaming stuff like goth and dark wave and EDM and new wave music. So tomorrow we're going to celebrate the fact that we are now part of the Creepy Crew, and we are going to have I mean, tomorrow was supposed to be 80s, 90s, and 2000s, which it'll still kind of fall within that time era anyway, but we're going to really focus on a lot of the goth and the new wave stuff tomorrow. So I hope that you'll be able to join us. We'll be here like 12 noon to probably 6 or so, and we'll see how things go. And I hope that you will enjoy it. And again, thank you, Fantastic Kitty. Now you guys have got a hype train going still, and so rather, what I'm going to do first is let's play a little music before we go. I'm going to play. There's a friends that we have locally who or a friend who's an Anishinaabe Irish singer songwriter. She writes her own music. She writes music with her sister, and she also is part of a local band. So we are. Her name is Dawn Redguy. Now we started out the stream with some of her solo music. So I'm going to. Oh, so the raid's got 29 subs and 1,530 bits. Thank you, everyone who contributed to that. So I'm gonna play. I'll start playing a music from that she did with her sister. They were part of a festival here that was specifically for women, female artists, and they were part of. So we'll play that. And while we're playing that, I guess I don't know if I could try to see if my raid calls will work. But if it don't, that's okay. Let me just go share. So I'll play this song with that she did with her sister Shauna. So it's Shauna and Dawn Red Sky, and Dawn actually has performed in our community events in the past, and both in our local park and actually events that we hosted in our on our property as well. So we really love having Dawn be part of our community and share the way that she does. So this is Dawn and Shauna. So let me get this playing. Whoops.
Oh, there's been trouble up on the mountain. Oh, darkness traveled all through that way. There's been trouble up on the hill. Just don't ask a soul about it, they won't tell you till this day. I was rambling down a mountain path. Ahead I spotted such an aftermath. My heart grew heavy and my legs were weak. I cried aloud and I fell down to my knees. I found a father, what did you see? Oh, there's been trouble upon the mountain. Oh, darkness traveled all through that way. There's been trouble upon the hill. Just don't ask a soul about it, they won't tell you till this day. I found a mother with long white hair. I asked her sweetly, where came all this despair? She turned around and her jaw was gone. Her eyes were black as coal